People often assume they know everything about a person after a few quick observations. They see the clothes you wear, the house you live in, the car you drive, and they decide your worth before learning your story. I learned that lesson many years ago, which is why I stopped trying to prove myself to anyone. My name is Margaret, and at 62 years old, I had become invisible to most people. Not because I wanted to be. Because people chose not to see me. After my husband passed away 12 years earlier, I lived a simple life. I stayed in the same modest house we had shared, drove an old sedan that still ran perfectly, and spent my days reading, gardening, and volunteering. Most people who met me assumed I was an ordinary retired widow living on a small pension. I never corrected them. The truth was far more complicated. But secrets have a purpose, and mine had protected something precious for a very long time. My son, Daniel, was the center of my world. He was kind, hardworking, and honest. From the moment he was old enough to understand money, I taught him that success should never define a person's value. I never wanted him to grow up entitled. I wanted him to build a life based on character. So even though I could have given him everything, I chose not to. He worked for scholarships. He worked part-time jobs. He built his own career. And because of that, he became a man I was incredibly proud of. When Daniel told me he had met someone special, I was genuinely excited. Her name was Vanessa. The first time I met her, she was charming. Beautiful smile. Perfect manners. Confident without appearing arrogant. At least that was my first impression. She brought flowers when she visited. Asked thoughtful questions. Complimented my cooking. Held Daniel's hand as though he were the most important person in the world. I remember watching them together and thinking how lucky my son was. For a while, everything seemed perfect. They dated for 2 years before getting engaged. I helped plan parts of the wedding. I paid for several expenses anonymously through Daniel because I didn't want attention or gratitude. The wedding was beautiful. Everyone was happy. And for the first few months after their marriage, I believed my son had found his forever partner. Then small things began to change. Nothing dramatic at first. Just little moments that were easy to ignore. Vanessa started speaking differently when Daniel wasn't around. Her smile became less genuine. Her patience became thinner. Her kindness seemed conditional. One afternoon, I visited their apartment with homemade lasagna. Daniel was still at work. Vanessa opened the door. The moment she realized I was alone, her expression shifted. Not completely. Just enough for me to notice. "Oh," she said. "You're here." Not hello. Not come in. Just those 3 words. I pretended not to notice. As the months passed, those moments became more frequent. Whenever Daniel was present, Vanessa acted warm and respectful. The moment he left the room, her tone changed. She corrected me unnecessarily. Ignored my opinions. Rolled her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. At first I questioned myself. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe marriage was harder than she expected. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But eventually patterns become impossible to ignore. One evening, the 3 of us had dinner together. Daniel mentioned that he wanted us all to take a family vacation. Before I could respond, Vanessa laughed. "That sounds expensive." Daniel smiled. "We can figure it out." Vanessa glanced at me. "Well, some people probably have more free time than money." The comment landed like a stone. Daniel didn't notice. He was checking a message on his phone. But Vanessa looked directly at me when she said it. She wanted me to understand exactly what she meant. I simply smiled. Years of experience had taught me something important. People reveal themselves eventually. You don't need to force it. You only need patience. Over the next year, Vanessa became increasingly obsessed with status. Every conversation seemed connected to promotions, salaries, luxury brands, or social standing. She constantly compared herself to others. Compared homes. Compared vacations. Compared careers. Compared incomes. Nothing ever seemed enough. What surprised me most was how differently she treated people depending on what she believed they could offer her. When speaking to wealthy neighbors, she was charming. When speaking to service workers, she was dismissive. When speaking to influential people, she was attentive. When speaking to me, she often acted as though I were an inconvenience. The painful part wasn't her behavior toward me. It was watching Daniel fail to see it. My son believed the best about everyone. That was one of his greatest strengths. Unfortunately, it was also one of his greatest weaknesses. One Sunday afternoon, the family gathered for Daniel's birthday. Several relatives attended. The atmosphere was warm and joyful. Everyone was sharing stories and laughing. Then someone asked Vanessa about her career. Her eyes immediately lit up. She loved discussing work. For nearly 20 minutes she spoke about company achievements, corporate leadership, executive decisions, and future opportunities. Everyone listened politely. Then one of my cousins asked, "Do you enjoy working there?" Vanessa smiled proudly. "It's one of the most respected companies in the industry." "That's wonderful," my cousin replied. "It must have great leadership." Vanessa nodded. "Absolutely. Though I've never actually met the CEO. She's extremely private." I remained silent. No one noticed. No one suspected. No one had any reason to. Vanessa continued speaking enthusiastically about the company. The irony would have been amusing if the situation hadn't been so sad. She spent nearly half an hour praising the organization that I had spent decades building. The same company whose name appeared on every document she handled. The same company whose vision she admired. The same company whose CEO she respected. Yet sitting only a few feet away was the woman she treated as though she had accomplished nothing. I watched her carefully that day. Not with anger. Not with resentment. With curiosity. Because I wanted to understand something. How could someone be so skilled at recognizing success in one place and completely blind to it in another? The answer eventually became clear. Vanessa didn't respect people. She respected appearances. And appearances can be deceiving. As the evening ended, she helped clear the table. For a brief moment, we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. She looked around at my simple clothes and modest home. Then she sighed. "You know, Margaret, Daniel worries about you too much." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "He spends so much time checking on you." She shrugged casually. "At some point people need to live their own lives." The words were polite. The message was not. For the first time, I saw exactly who she was becoming. And standing there in my own kitchen, listening to the woman my son loved quietly push me aside, I realized something important. Vanessa believed she understood power. She believed she understood success. She believed she knew who mattered and who didn't. But she had absolutely no idea who was standing in front of her. For the next few weeks,
soon enough,
I said nothing.
that misunderstanding would
I
change
didn't
everything.
confront Vanessa. I didn't tell Daniel what she had said. And most importantly, I didn't reveal the truth. Some people might have called my silence weakness, but it wasn't. I was waiting. Not for revenge. For clarity. There is a difference between making assumptions about someone and knowing their true character. I had spent most of my life building a company from nothing, and one thing business had taught me was that people showed their real selves when they believed nobody important was watching. Vanessa had no idea that I was watching. She also had no idea that every morning, before she arrived at work, I received a detailed report about the company's performance. I knew which departments were growing. I knew which managers were struggling. I knew which employees were being promoted. I knew which projects were behind schedule. And yes, I knew Vanessa. Not because I was spying on my daughter-in-law. Because she worked for me. The company was called Harrison Global. 28 years earlier, it had been nothing more than a small office with 6 employees, 2 borrowed computers, and a business plan everyone told me was unrealistic. My husband had believed in me. He had mortgaged our first home so I could keep the company alive. For years, I worked 12-hour days. I answered phones myself. I cleaned the office after employees left. I negotiated contracts while sitting in my car because we couldn't afford a proper conference room. There were months when I wasn't sure whether we would survive. But we did. Slowly. Then rapidly. Eventually, Harrison Global became one of the most successful companies in its field. People began calling me a visionary. Business magazines wanted interviews. Investors wanted meetings. Executives wanted partnerships. But I hated the attention. After my husband died, I stepped away from the public side of the business. I remained CEO, but I stopped appearing at conferences and interviews. I appointed a trusted executive team to manage daily operations. My name disappeared from most public-facing materials. The company still belonged to me. I simply chose to live quietly. Daniel knew his mother had once owned a business. What he didn't know was how large it had become. I never told him. When he was growing up, I didn't want him thinking his future was guaranteed because of his mother's wealth. I wanted him to earn his own victories. And he had. Vanessa, however, was fascinated by the company. She talked about it constantly. She wanted a promotion. She wanted recognition. She wanted to move into management. And there was nothing wrong with ambition. I actually admired ambition. What concerned me was how she pursued it. One morning, I received an email from one of the senior managers. It wasn't unusual. I received hundreds of reports every month. But this one caught my attention. It mentioned Vanessa. Apparently, she had recently criticized one of her supervisors in front of the entire team. She had told several co-workers that the supervisor was too old-fashioned and didn't understand modern business. Later that same week, she had taken credit for part of a project that had primarily been completed by another employee. The employee had complained privately. Nothing serious enough for disciplinary action. Yet, I asked my executive assistant to keep an eye on the situation. Not because Vanessa was my daughter-in-law. Because I had a responsibility to every employee in my company. That distinction mattered to me. I refused to use my position to protect family members. If Vanessa was doing excellent work, she deserved recognition. If she was mistreating people, she deserved consequences. And if she was simply ambitious but inexperienced, she deserved an opportunity to learn. Unfortunately, the reports continued. Vanessa became increasingly difficult with her co-workers. She interrupted people during meetings. Dismissed suggestions. Complained about management. And whenever someone received recognition before her, she took it personally. Then something happened that changed my perspective completely. Vanessa came home with Daniel one evening. I was visiting them for dinner. They were discussing her career. Daniel looked proud. "She's been doing really well," he said. Vanessa smiled. "My manager says I'm ready for a bigger role." I smiled too. "That's wonderful." She looked at me. "I've worked very hard." "I know." She paused. Then she laughed softly. "Sometimes hard work isn't enough." I knew there was something behind the comment. "What do you mean?" She leaned back. "People at the top don't always recognize talent." Daniel frowned slightly. "What happened?" "Nothing." She waved her hand. "It's just frustrating when executives make decisions based on politics." I didn't respond. She continued. I'd been thinking about applying for a position in the executive office. Daniel smiled. That's great. It would put me much closer to senior leadership. Then she looked at me. There was something almost ironic about the way she said it. I think people should know who they're dealing with. I wondered if she understood the meaning of her own words. Probably not. Later that night, after they went to bed, I drove home alone. The city lights passed across my windshield. For the first time, I seriously considered telling Daniel everything. Not about the company. About Vanessa. I wondered whether I was making a mistake by staying silent. Maybe my silence was allowing a problem to grow. Maybe I was protecting my son's feelings at the expense of his future. But then I remembered something my husband once told me. Never make a permanent decision while you're angry about a temporary moment. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. And disappointment can be dangerous because it makes people act emotionally. I decided to wait. The following Monday, Vanessa received an invitation to an internal leadership development program. It was highly selective. Only a handful of employees were chosen each year. She was thrilled. She called Daniel immediately. Then she called me. That surprised me. Margaret, I got into the leadership program. I could hear the excitement in her voice. I'm happy for you, I said. Thank you. There was a pause. Then she said something I didn't expect. You should be proud of me. I smiled. I am. She laughed. Maybe someday I'll be sitting in the executive offices. Maybe, I said. She had no idea that the office she dreamed about belonged to me. She had no idea that the woman she considered ordinary could end her career with one signature. She had no idea that every promotion, every executive appointment, and every major strategic decision eventually crossed my desk. But I wasn't interested in destroying her. I wanted to know whether she could change. Because underneath all her arrogance, I still saw someone who could become better. I knew what pressure could do to people. I knew ambition could make people lose themselves. So I gave her time. And for a while, it seemed like things might improve. She became more professional. She treated her co-workers with slightly more respect. She stopped complaining openly. I thought perhaps I had misjudged her. Maybe she had simply been young, insecure, and desperate to prove herself. Maybe marriage had made her feel responsible for building a successful life. Maybe she was finally growing up. Then, one afternoon, I received a report that made me put my coffee down. It wasn't about her performance. It wasn't about her attitude. It was about something she had said during a private conversation with another employee. According to the report, Vanessa had been discussing Daniel's family. Specifically, me. She had laughed and said, "My mother-in-law thinks she's important, but honestly, she has no idea how the real world works." The employee had apparently asked why Vanessa felt that way. Vanessa's response was even more painful. Because she's never accomplished anything. I stared at those words for a long time. Never accomplished anything. I looked around my office. The walls were covered with photographs from the company's earliest days. Our first office. Our first major contract. The first 100 employees. The first international expansion. And in one photograph, standing beside my late husband, was a much younger version of me. The woman Vanessa believed had accomplished nothing. I smiled sadly. She didn't know my story. She had judged my entire life from the outside. And that was when I realized the truth. The secret I had kept for years was no longer simply protecting my privacy. It was about to become a lesson. Because Vanessa had spent months believing she knew exactly who I was. Soon, she was going to discover how completely wrong she had been. The morning everything changed began like any other Monday. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, opened the curtains, and stood quietly in my kitchen while the city slowly came alive outside. There was something strangely peaceful about that morning. I didn't know it at the time, but within a few hours, Vanessa's entire understanding of her life was going to collapse. For months, I had watched her climb higher inside Harrison Global. She had completed the leadership program. Her performance numbers were good. Her presentations were polished. And despite the problems I had heard about, she had learned how to control her behavior when senior executives were watching. That was what made this situation difficult. She knew how to look professional. She knew how to say the right words. She knew how to smile at the right moment. But character isn't what people show when important people are watching. Character is what remains when they believe nobody matters. And Vanessa had begun to believe that I didn't matter. The final incident happened at a family dinner. Daniel had invited both of us to their house because he wanted to celebrate Vanessa's recent professional success. There was good food, music playing softly in the background, and a bottle of wine on the table. Vanessa was in a wonderful mood. She had recently been shortlisted for a management position. She talked about it throughout dinner. "I think this could finally be the position I've been working toward," she said. Daniel smiled proudly. "You deserve it." She looked at him. "I know." I noticed the confidence in her voice. Not confidence born from accomplishment. Entitlement. She turned toward me. "You know, Margaret, Daniel has always been too modest." I smiled. "He's a good man. He could be much more successful if he stopped worrying about family obligations." Daniel looked uncomfortable. "What does that mean?" She laughed. "I'm just saying that people have to prioritize their future." I put down my fork. Family shouldn't have to compete with someone's future. She shrugged. "That's easy for you to say." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because you don't understand what it's like to build a career." The room became quiet. Daniel stared at her. "Vanessa." She looked surprised. "What?" "That's enough." But Vanessa wasn't finished. I didn't mean anything by it. She turned toward me. "Margaret, I respect you, but sometimes you act like you know everything." I stayed calm. "I never said I knew everything." "Exactly." She smiled. Then she said the sentence that finally crossed the line. "Honestly, you should be grateful Daniel still lets you be involved in our lives." Silence. Complete silence. Daniel's face changed. I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He had finally heard what I had been hearing for months. He finally understood. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "apologize." She stared at him. "For what?" "For what you just said." She crossed her arms. "I was being honest." I looked at my son. Then I looked at Vanessa. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt certain. I stood from the table. "I think dinner is over." Daniel immediately stood. "Mom, wait." I shook my head. "It's okay." I walked toward the door. Behind me, Vanessa muttered something. I stopped. "What did you say?" She looked at me. "I said you always make everything dramatic." I smiled. "No, Vanessa." I opened the door. "You just haven't learned the difference between drama and consequences." Then I left. That night, Daniel called me. He apologized. Over and over. "Mom, I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize for her." "But I should have noticed." I sat quietly on my sofa. "You believed the best about someone you loved. That doesn't make it okay." "No." He was silent. Then he asked, "Why have you never told me what you really think about her?" I could have told him everything. I could have told him about the company. About the reports. About the conversations. About the way she treated employees. But I wasn't ready. Instead, I said, because I wanted you to see it yourself. He sighed. I think I'm starting to. The next morning, I called my executive assistant. Schedule the quarterly leadership meeting. Of course. And I want all department heads there. Everyone? Everyone. There was a pause. Should I notify the CEO? I smiled. I am the CEO. My assistant laughed softly. I know. Then make sure the meeting is prepared. That meeting was going to be different. For years, I had avoided appearing in person. The board members knew me. Senior executives knew me. But most employees had never met me. Vanessa had never met me. Not as CEO. Not as the woman who owned the company. Only as Margaret. Her mother-in-law. The ordinary older woman she believed had accomplished nothing. I wanted that distinction to disappear. Not because I wanted revenge. Because she needed to understand that the world was much larger than the assumptions she made about people. 2 days later, the announcement went out. A special leadership meeting had been scheduled. Attendance was mandatory for all department managers and selected employees. Vanessa received the invitation. I knew because my assistant forwarded me the attendance list. Her name was there. She was excited. According to one of her co-workers, she believed the meeting could influence the promotion she wanted. She spent the next 2 days preparing. She practiced her presentation. Reviewed company figures. Prepared questions. Bought a new suit. Meanwhile, I remained silent. At home, nothing changed. I still wore my simple clothes. Still drove my old car. Still answered Vanessa politely when she spoke to me. She had no idea what was coming. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at the headquarters through the private entrance. The security guard smiled. Good morning, Ms. Harrison. Good morning. Employees greeted me as I walked through the building. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. A few executives followed me. Vanessa wasn't there yet. I entered the executive conference room. The long table was already surrounded by managers. At the head of the room was an empty chair. My chair. The employees began taking their seats. Then Vanessa walked in. She was holding a folder. She looked confident. She smiled at several colleagues. Then she froze. Because I was standing at the front of the room. At first, she looked confused. She glanced around. Then back at me. Margaret? Nobody answered. One of the senior executives stood. Good morning, Ms. Harrison. Vanessa's face changed. She looked at him. Then at me. Ms. Harrison? I nodded. Good morning, Vanessa. She stared at me. Why are you here? I looked around the room. Then I sat in the CEO's chair. The room became completely silent. I folded my hands on the table. I'm here because this is my company. Vanessa's folder slipped slightly in her hands. No. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I think you already know me, I said. Her eyes filled with shock. The woman she had dismissed. The woman she had insulted. The woman she believed had accomplished nothing. Was sitting in the chair she had spent months dreaming about reaching. And suddenly, Vanessa understood something that she should have understood long before. You never really know what someone has built simply by looking at what they choose to show you. For several seconds, Vanessa didn't move. She simply stood there with her folder pressed against her chest, staring at me as if she were trying to convince herself that what she was seeing couldn't possibly be real. Around the conference table, nobody spoke. The executives knew exactly who I was. The department heads knew. The board members knew. And now Vanessa knew. But knowing the truth and accepting it are two completely different things. She looked at me again. "You're the CEO?" I nodded. "Yes." Her lips parted, but no words came out. One of the senior executives quietly pulled out a chair for her. "Ms. Carter, please take your seat." Vanessa didn't move. She looked at him, then back at me. "But..." I waited. She finally sat down. Her hands were trembling. The same woman who had walked into the room confidently just moments earlier now looked completely lost. I could almost see the memories moving through her mind. Every dinner. Every conversation. Every sarcastic remark. Every time she had looked down on me. Every time she had complained about my clothes. Every time she had told Daniel that I didn't understand success. She was remembering all of it. And now every memory had a completely different meaning. I didn't want to humiliate her. That was never my intention. So I began the meeting normally. I welcomed everyone. Reviewed the company's performance. Discussed upcoming projects. Talked about expansion. Nothing dramatic. Nothing personal. Vanessa sat quietly. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't touch the presentation she had prepared. She was listening to every word. At one point, I asked for an update from her department. Her manager stood and presented the numbers. Then I turned toward Vanessa. "Would you like to add anything?" She swallowed. "No, ma'am." The room became uncomfortable. I noticed one executive glance at another. I knew what everyone was thinking. They had probably heard rumors. But nobody knew the full story. I decided to keep the meeting professional. "Good. Let's move forward." The meeting continued for another hour. When it ended, the employees slowly began leaving. Vanessa remained seated. Eventually, only a few executives and I were left in the room. I looked at her. "You can stay." She nodded. The executives left. The door closed. For the first time, we were alone. Vanessa stared at the table. "I don't understand." "What don't you understand? Why didn't you tell me?" I leaned back. "Would you have treated me differently?" She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I continued. "You thought I was insignificant." "I didn't." "You did." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong." "Yes." She looked at me. "I didn't know." "That's exactly the point." She lowered her head. "I thought you were just..." She stopped. "Just what?" She couldn't say it. "Just an ordinary woman?" She nodded slowly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Because the truth wasn't that she had underestimated a CEO. She had underestimated a human being. "I didn't hide my life because I was ashamed of it," I said. "I hid it because I wanted people to meet me without knowing what I owned." She wiped her eyes. "Why didn't Daniel know?" "Because I didn't want my son to grow up believing money made him better than anyone else." She looked genuinely confused. "But you own all of this?" "Yes." "The company?" "Yes." "The entire company?" I nodded. "The controlling ownership, yes." She stared at me. Then she whispered, "All those years." "I built it with your father-in-law." She looked down. "I said so many things." "I know. I'm sorry." I didn't respond immediately. An apology means very little when it comes only after consequences appear. I wanted to know whether she was sorry because she had hurt me or because she had discovered my power. So I asked her a simple question. "If I weren't the CEO, would you still apologize?" She looked at me. Her face changed. That question hit deeper than anything else. I don't know, she whispered. That's an honest answer. She began crying. I'm ashamed. You should be. She looked surprised. I continued. Not because you didn't know my position. You should be ashamed because you believed someone's worth depended on their position. She wiped her face. I thought you looked down on me. I never did. I thought you didn't understand how hard I was working. I knew exactly how hard you were working. She looked up. How? Because I read the reports. Her expression changed again. What reports? Your performance reports. She froze. I explained that I knew about the leadership program, her projects, her presentations, and her progress. I also know about the employees you treated poorly. She looked terrified. I never. Vanessa. My voice remained calm. Don't lie to me. She looked down. I made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. I was ambitious. Ambition isn't the problem. What is? How you treat people while you're trying to succeed. She didn't respond. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, hundreds of employees were moving through the building. People with families. People with dreams. People who depended on their jobs. I turned back toward her. This company isn't just buildings and numbers. It's thousands of people's lives. She nodded. I understand. Do you? Yes. Then prove it. She looked at me. What do you want me to do? Nothing for me. I paused. Change for yourself. Her tears returned. I don't know if I can. You can. Why would you give me a chance? Because I once needed someone to give me one. She stared at me. When I started this company, people laughed at me. Banks rejected me. Investors told me I didn't understand business. I was underestimated more times than I can remember. I smiled faintly. But I never forgot how it felt. She whispered, and I became the person who made others feel that way. Yes. She covered her face. I'm sorry. This time, I believe she meant it. But forgiveness wasn't going to erase consequences. I told her she would remain in her position, but her promotion would be paused. She would also be required to participate in a leadership and workplace conduct program. If she wanted another opportunity, she would have to earn it. She nodded. I understand. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Will you tell Daniel? I looked at her. That depends. On what? Whether you tell him. She looked terrified. I didn't want to control that decision. She needed to make it herself. That evening, when I returned home, Daniel was waiting for me. He looked worried. Mom. Yes? Vanessa told me. I stopped. He continued. She told me everything. I sat down. What did she tell you? That you're the CEO. I smiled sadly. Yes. He shook his head. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted you to become your own man. He sat beside me. I can't believe I never knew. That was the point. He laughed softly through his emotions. You were sitting at family dinners listening to her talk about your company. I know. Mom, that's almost unbelievable. I thought so too. Then he became serious. She also told me how she treated you. I looked at him. Are you angry? At her? Yes. He took a long breath. I am. Then he looked at me. But I'm more disappointed in myself. I reached for his hand. You don't need to carry that. I should have seen it. you saw what you were ready to see. He nodded. For the first time in months, I felt that something had shifted. Not because Vanessa discovered my secret. Not because I had finally revealed my power. But because the truth had forced everyone to stop pretending. And sometimes, that is the moment a family finally has the chance to heal. The following morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to hide anything. The secret that had followed me through family dinners, holidays, birthdays, and ordinary conversations was finally out in the open. Daniel knew. Vanessa knew. And soon, everyone who needed to know would know. But I didn't feel victorious. That surprised me. For months, I had imagined what it would feel like when Vanessa finally discovered who I really was. I thought perhaps I would feel satisfied. Maybe even relieved. Instead, I felt tired. Because the truth had never been about money. It had never been about proving that I was more powerful than Vanessa. It had been about something much simpler. Respect. The next afternoon, Vanessa came to my house. She stood at the front door for several seconds before knocking. When I opened it, she looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence that had once seemed almost effortless was gone. She looked nervous. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course." She entered quietly. For the first time, she looked around my house without judgment. The same house she had once considered small. The same furniture she had once thought old-fashioned. The same kitchen where she had once made comments about my lifestyle. Now she looked at everything differently. She sat across from me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." I nodded. "You do." She took a deep breath. "I treated you terribly." I remained silent. "I thought you were someone who hadn't accomplished much." She looked down. "I thought Daniel was wasting time worrying about you." Her voice broke. "And I thought I was better than you." There it was. The truth. Not dressed up. Not softened. Just the truth. I appreciated that. "I was wrong," she continued. "I know." She looked up. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I studied her face. "Why not?" "Because I don't deserve it yet." That answer surprised me. I leaned back. "Maybe you're finally understanding." She nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "That I should be ashamed because I judged people's worth based on their position." I smiled faintly. "That was never just about you." She looked confused. "It's about all of us." She listened. Every human being makes assumptions. We see a person for 5 minutes and think we know their entire story. We see an old car and assume someone is unsuccessful. We see expensive clothes and assume someone is important. We see someone's job title and assume they're valuable. I paused. But none of those things tell us who someone is. Vanessa nodded slowly. "I understand now." "I hope you do." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you keep me at the company?" I smiled. "Because firing you would have been easy." She looked surprised. "And I didn't want easy." "What did you want?" "I wanted you to learn." She looked down. "You could have destroyed my career." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" "Because if I used my power to punish everyone who disappointed me, I'd become the kind of person I spent my entire life trying not to become." She was quiet. Then she said something that stayed with me. "I think that's what I was most ashamed of." "What?" "Finding out that the person I thought was powerless had more power than I could ever imagine, and she still chose kindness." I looked at her. "Kindness isn't weakness." "I know." "No." I don't think you did. She smiled sadly. You're right. A few weeks passed. Things at the company began to change. Vanessa stopped trying to impress everyone. She started listening. She apologized to the employee whose work she had once taken credit for. She publicly acknowledged the team members who had helped with her projects. She began arriving early and staying late. But this time, it wasn't because she wanted attention. She genuinely wanted to improve. I received reports about her progress. They were different now. Not perfect, but different. One report mentioned that Vanessa had stayed after a meeting to help a new employee understand a complicated project. Another said she had defended a coworker who was being unfairly criticized. A third described how she had voluntarily given credit to another employee during a presentation. Small things. But small things matter. Real change rarely arrives dramatically. It happens quietly. One decision at a time. One reaction at a time. One moment when a person chooses to become better instead of simply appearing better. Then came the day Vanessa received another opportunity. A management position became available. Normally, her previous behavior would have made her an unlikely candidate. But her recent progress was impossible to ignore. I asked her manager for an honest evaluation. He told me something interesting. She's changed. How? She doesn't need to be the smartest person in the room anymore. I smiled. That's a good sign. It is. I approved the promotion. But I didn't tell Vanessa personally. Her manager did. When she came into my office afterward, she was crying. I got the position. I know. She laughed. I thought you would be angry. Why? Because of everything. I smiled. Your promotion isn't a gift. She nodded. I know. You earned it. She looked at me. Thank you. Don't thank me. She smiled. Then what should I say? Keep earning it. She laughed through her tears. I will. That evening, Daniel invited both of us to dinner. It was the first time all three of us had sat together since the truth had come out. The atmosphere was different. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. There were no fake smiles. No carefully chosen words. No hidden resentment. We talked. We laughed. At one point, Daniel looked at me and shook his head. I still can't believe my mother is the CEO of a company I used to complain about. I laughed. You complained about my company? Only occasionally. Vanessa laughed. Occasionally? We all laughed. It felt strange. But good. After dinner, Vanessa helped me clean the dishes. When Daniel left the kitchen, she looked at me. Can I tell you something? Of course. I used to think being successful meant making people notice you. I listened. Now I think it's about what you do when nobody is watching. I smiled. That's a much better definition. She nodded. Then she looked around the kitchen. Do you know what's funny? What? I used to think this house was proof that you weren't successful. I laughed softly. And now? Now I think it's proof that you never needed to prove anything. That sentence touched me more than she probably realized. Because she finally understood the thing I had spent years learning myself. Money can buy comfort. Power can open doors. Success can create opportunities. But none of those things can make a person worthy. Character does that. Love does that. How you treat people who cannot give you anything in return, that tells the real story. Months later, I attended one of Vanessa's leadership meetings. She didn't know I was coming. I sat quietly at the back. She walked into the room and began speaking. She was confident. But she was different. She invited opinions. She listened to criticism. She thanked her team. And when one young employee made a mistake, Vanessa didn't embarrass her. She simply said, "It's okay. Let's figure it out together." I smiled. That was the moment I knew the lesson had finally reached her. Not because she had discovered that I was the CEO, but because she had changed how she treated someone she believed had less power than her. After the meeting, Vanessa came to me. "Did I do okay?" I smiled. "You did more than okay." She looked relieved. Then she hugged me. It was the first real hug between us. No obligation. No performance. No pretending. Just two women standing in a quiet office, finally understanding each other. Before she left, she turned around. "I'll never forget what you told me." "What did I tell you?" She smiled. "You never really know what someone has built by looking at what they choose to show you." I nodded. "Good." She walked away. I looked out the window at the city below. For decades, I had built that company. But standing there, I realized something. The greatest thing I had ever built wasn't a business. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't a reputation. It was a life where I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. And Vanessa had finally learned the same lesson. She once believed she had everything figured out because she knew what my life looked like from the outside. She had judged me by my clothes, my house, my car, and my quiet personality. She never imagined that the woman she considered ordinary was the CEO of the company where she worked. But the greatest twist wasn't that I owned the company. The greatest twist was that when I finally had the power to punish her, I chose to give her the chance to become a better person. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. Sometimes it's watching them become the person they once didn't believe they needed to be. And sometimes, the most powerful goodbye isn't the one where you walk away. It's the one where you finally let go of the resentment that was holding you back. I had spent years protecting my secret. But in the end, I realized I had been protecting something even more important. My peace. And that was worth more than everything I had ever built.